The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, the official sequel to Zelda's Adventure for the CDI. Or maybe not. I don't know. It sure seems that way. This was a surprise announcement. One that I was very pleasantly surprised to see because I do feel that this sort of overhead Zelda game is still my preferred take. I loved the Link's Awakening remake, and it would seem that they have taken that same technology and leveraged it to build a new game here. The developer of this game was not specified, but given its extreme similarities to the Link's Awakening remake, I'm going to guess that it's Grezzo again.
Yeah.
It's likely Grezzo,
Actually,
and it's likely the same engine.
yeah, I did a bit of digging on this, and in
Yeah.
2021, Grezzo was looking for some graphics programmers, I think people, and UI designers, I think, to work in a new game, some developers to work in a new game. And it was described as running on Unity,
Uh-huh.
medieval, and stylish, but not photorealistic. So I think that's
It's got to be it.
pretty much dead on for this one. And yeah, the tech base is presumably quite similar to the way that Link's Awakening was developed. It looks almost
Yep.
identical, from like the chibi characters, the tilt focus look, to the reliance on like shadow maps and stuff like that. The resemblance is almost one to one. Initially, I kind of thought like, oh, maybe this is another remake actually,
Right, right, right.
because it just looks so similar to that design. And yeah, I would certainly expect that it might carry over some of the other technical aspects of the game that aren't so positive, but maybe you can get to that.
And it makes sense then to they already have experience with this technology to then leverage that in a new game, and I think that's what we're seeing here, of course. Although I have to admit, there's the shot during the initial part of the reveal when Zelda ends up outside, and then she walks to the edge of the cliff. They kind of show the entire world out before you, and then it shows the title card. I'm
hmm
very skeptical that that's actually, well, I mean, maybe it could be if it's I'd be surprised if they're able to pull off that sort of wide open camera shot, given what we know about how the last game ran. You know what I mean? And the issues that we're
Yeah.
seeing in this trailer.
We didn't
If
see that in Link's Awakening at all, from my
no, no, no,
recollection.
no, no, they never
Yeah.
showed the entire world like that. Which, by the way, this map is a close match for A Link to the Past this time.
Okay.
Which, by the way, also means that there's now slopes and angles. Because if you
That's
remember,
true, yeah.
Link's Awakening being a Game Boy game with limited screen real estate, they used completely 90-degree angle tiles everywhere. I think they could have done slopes, but it just takes up too much space on that very low res screen. So they kind of settled on that blocky design. I think that is obviously gone here, so it's a little bit more open ended.
hmm
But I guess the big conceit here is that you play as Zelda this time, so it doesn't have the normal Link based
That's true.
combat. It seems to be more of a puzzle game this time through the lens of the Legend of Zelda, which is interesting. From um, but first, I guess the elephant in the room, at least from a Digital Foundry perspective, is really the performance woes because notoriously Link's Awakening remake, I actually thought it was moderately okay a lot of the time, but that overworld would often struggle to run well, and it was specifically usually tied to it tended to be worse whenever you would leave a building. Like let's say you enter a building, a dungeon, whatever. When you first emerge from that area, the initial 5-10 seconds will run at like 30 FPS and then it snaps back to 60, which to me suggests that maybe there's some kind of CPU bottleneck there happening. It's like loading, fetching data because once, if you just walk out the door, stand still, and then you move, it will just be a perfect 60 in most cases. So I
Yeah,
think
it
it's
had
like,
kind of a weird behavior where it would kind of like go to 30 and then go to 60 and then go to 30, and it didn't really have a rhyme or reason to it, really.
right. I mean, yeah, obviously double buffered, but it was more like there was no clear reason why it was dipping from a
Yeah,
visual perspective, which leads me to believe it was related to the CPU doing whatever it was doing in the background. And unfortunately, that exact type of slowdown is visible everywhere in this trailer. And yeah, it's not finished, and I'm hoping it improves, but it does have me a little bit concerned.
I liked Link's Awakening. I played a few hours of Link's Awakening on my Switch.
You only played a
I
few
could
hours? Oh man.
I couldn't get over the performance issues. I thought at the time, even in 2019, I'll just wait for Switch 2 for this maybe.
Oh, you poor sweet summer child.
Yeah, because it really did not perform very well. It's specifically the double buffer that kind of got to me, because like if you're dropping a couple frames here and there, I can ignore it, but if you're dropping straight to 30, 30, 60, 30, 60, it's pretty tough. And here the performance does seem, I would say, worse, but obviously this is pre-release footage. It's not something to be judged too harshly. And normally I wouldn't make too much of a point of talking about pre-release performance, but in this case you have a bit of a pedigree and you have Unity and you have kind of a bit of a cauldron of things that probably does not lend itself
Correct.
towards really strong Switch performance. In terms
Yes.
of the overall like technical look of it, though, it does look extremely similar to
It's Link's Awakening.
Link's Awakening. I counted out some shots. I got 756p roughly in the shots I counted, which is roughly where Link's Awakening was. I think it was more like 720p there. You know, it's very similar
Yeah, it's
range.
very
You had
similar.
DRS in Link's Awakening as well.
Hmm.
No anti-aliasing, but you know, I think given the engine and given what they're doing with this title, like it's probably for the best at these resolutions in particular. So
Hot tip
yeah.
for anybody with a scaler like the RetroTink 4K or the Morph, Pixel FX Morph is just, I always run my Switch into one of those so I can get nearest neighbor upscaling. And for like 720p games, if you do 720 to 4K with nearest sampling, it looks amazing. It's amazing how
Yeah.
sharp it is. It's genuinely great. So this is definitely a game I will play that way.
In this case, though, I would hope. We obviously don't know what the backwards compatibility modes would look like on Switch 2, but if there is a good backwards compatibility mode to run this under to enhance performance, or indeed a native Switch 2 version, which would obviously be
That would be
fantastic.
nice, yeah.
I think this is the kind of game that would scale really nicely to higher resolutions. Like the artwork, I think would scale just really nicely to 1440p, say. Clean up the image quality. I think it would look fantastic, and it could run a lot better, hopefully, on that class of hardware.
Exactly.
I am just concerned that that 3060 kind of lurch is not gonna be super conducive for smooth gameplay, which is unusual because with these Nintendo games, they really do tend to prioritize that player feel, like that seat of the pants kind of feel. And here, I'm just worried that's a little bit too compromised, at least judging from Link's Awakening and from the overall variable performance level in this preview footage.
Yeah, that's for sure. It is worth noting that Link's Awakening was worse in the preview builds than it was in the final
Yes,
game.
yeah.
And also, Link's Awakening is largely fine in all the dungeons. It's mainly
Mhm.
just the overworld that struggled, but you spend a lot of time out there, so yeah, not great. I do think conceptually, though, the game is interesting, and it's not something we've really seen before. It's a cool concept where you're playing as Zelda, but you don't really have access to the typical tools that Link has, which is a good chance for them to sort of mix it up and find new, unexpected tools that you've not really seen in Zelda before. So that could be very, very interesting, and I hope it turns out good. I will certainly be checking this out when it does land.
Yeah.
Yeah,
My only other thought on this, last final thought on this, is that
Please.
the game has a kind of a very glossy aesthetic.
Oh, yeah.
And that kind of does
Toy-like.
not really work. Yeah. It doesn't really work for a lot of other games, but here, that kind of glossiness and the contrast between the matte surfaces and the glossy surfaces is just enough to give you that sense of material quality because of the kind of style they're going for, that it actually makes it look like a really visually compelling and striking game. Whereas with a lot of other titles, if they had this level of glossiness, we'd say, oh, it looks like plastic. But here, that's kind of the whole purpose. So I think it's interesting how certain visual flaws in some games are really not in others, even though it's the very similar
Exactly.
technical characteristics. But yeah, I think my only concern is performance. Everything else looks really, really good. And the game
Agreed.
itself looks very
Agreed.
exciting, like you said.